Hi, welcome to Shop Talk Live. This is episode 324. I'm Amanda Russell.
And I'm Ben Stranham.
You and Mike chat this episode about some interesting stuff.
We do. This is one of the... So Mike and I go over two questions. And then... well, I guess we haven't talked about how we're going to format it. I think it's going to start with you. But...
Oh, should it? Oh.
I think it'll start with you. But... at the end, Mike and I answer two questions, or Mike answers two questions, and it's one of those times where you think it's going to be a quick answer, and Mike has all of the angles. Sometimes Mike answering a Shop Talk Live question is like a football play analysis, where you're like, oh, I didn't realize there was that many things going on at the field at the same time.
It was a surprisingly long answer. I listened into this, and yeah, sometimes I know it's going to be a long answer, so I'm like, I'll just put this at the front and then, order them a certain way. But I was surprised at how deep you guys dove into that question.
Yeah. So for the listener, we talk about peg joinery and all of the variables at play, and it goes on. It's like a 25-minute answer about peg joinery.
Never thought about this much.
I'm sorry, Amanda.
No, I enjoyed it. I was like, okay, I need to start rethinking a lot of things. I think it's a good.
But more importantly, what are you doing in this episode?
I am chatting with Larissa, Huff, and Adrian Ferrazzutti about boxes. You
were starstruck.
Yeah, I was a little nervous. I had to like Adrian and I jumped in the Zoom meeting before Larissa got there, and I was like, I text Larissa like, I am so nervous right now. I'm glad she and I were could be on the same page about that. But yeah, it was a really good discussion on boxes, prototypes, like small production runs versus not doing small production runs.
It really is an interesting conversation that about, like, I think the initial intent was about boxes, but there was a lot of prototype talk and a lot of production run talk, and super interesting take. And for the people who don't know who Adrian's like one of the beasts of woodworking world. Like he is super creative, super technique based, does things that I've never thought of doing because I've never thought of making the things he makes, and his problems aren't my problems, but watching him solve these problems is educational at its core, so
yeah, and very super creative. Like, I saw you commented on one of his Instagram posts the other day where he struck a scroll saw blade and it like went into this music, and of course you like know the exact note.
Actually, Adrian and I had a whole conversation in the DMs about Indian ragas and how it's not a 12-tone scale and blah blah. We went a little off topic there.
This is what happens when you bring woodworkers together.
Yeah, there's always like weird convergences of knowledge and interests. But yeah, Adrian's just phenomenal, and Larissa, as everyone knows, is just creative and wonderful take on boxes and prototypes and teaching and all sorts of stuff. So, we should briefly mention Woodworking in America 24 is coming up. And I don't want to send out like a discount code, but I'm pretty sure if you go to like your favorite woodworkers Instagram pages, you could find a discount code for anyone who's like, if it was just a little bit cheaper. So Mark Spagnolo is going to be there now. Matt Cremona. There's somebody else that we're like right on the cusp of signing.
Can't say just yet.
I just messaged Phil and he's like, we're not quite. So, so people are being added. It's going to be a really fun show. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to hanging out the day before at the Woodsmith shop and letting everyone see the TV studio because it's a really cool place to be. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Can't wait. October 11th and 12th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good thing you remembered. I didn't. All right. Well, on with the show. Quick note, the audio is a little substandard on this conversation with Larissa, Adrian, and Amanda. I did everything I could, but sometimes that happens. If it's beyond your ability to hear past those things, please move on to the end of the conversation with Mike and I. If not, it's worth it. I promise.
Well, this is, thank you both for joining me. This is Larissa and Adrian Ferrazzutti, and we are going to do a fun episode on box topics, but hopefully cover just a lot more. But Adrian, since you're new on the podcast, would you like to get started and kind of introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Adrian Ferrazzutti, furniture maker, teacher from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. I'm currently here at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship on an artist in residency, basically visiting artist for a month. And so I haven't done that in 10 years. So it's a real treat to just be able to be here and create things and not have to worry about, outside pressures. So I don't know if you want more information on me, but I balance my life between commission work and teaching.
Mm-hmm. How much would you say is what's the balance between those two right now?
Right now, about 1/3 of the year teaching, 2/3 making. But that changes. It could be 50-50. It's never more than 50-50.
That's nice balance. Larissa, you've been teaching a lot lately.
I have. This has been a lot of teaching this year, which has been great.
Yeah, it's so you just got back from
Cosin in North Carolina. Yeah, I was there for a week. And then I'm off to Peters Valley and the Wendell Castle Workshop, and then eventually Philadelphia Furniture Workshop. So I'll be a couple more places this year.
Nice. And you're working, well, we share the shop, so I kind of know what you're doing anyway, but you've been working on the spiral boxes, which, another series of those, which are super fun. And when I told people we were having you on the podcast, but we'll jump into this, but yeah, people are very interested in that process. Adrian, what are you working on at the residency right
now? I'm working on chair designs. And so I'm trying to make as many chair prototypes in my time here as possible. And so the goal was to do one a day, which is proving to be a little bit tough. It's more like one every 2 days. And so I'm on chair number 5 right now. And so hopefully I can get 5 more done by the end of next week. And they're all designs that I've pulled out of sketchbooks from over 20 years ago to present. And I've just I'm just picking here and there which ones might be worth pursuing. And hopefully in the long run, I'll actually make 1 or 2 of them if they're successful.
I love that. So all the design work's done. You're just knocking out this idea that's been...
There's no design work. It's just the design work is making the prototype. And so it's just a thumbnail sketch. It's not even...
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's just a scribble. It's something of interest. And so I'm just fabricating full-size sittable mock-ups out of spruce 2x8s and cheap plywood. And that's my design process. My design process is actually making the thing, not drawing the thing. And so that's what I'm doing.
Nice. That's awesome. And really ambitious, doing a 2-day chair prototype is really incredible.
Yeah. Well, they're not precious, right? They're hot glued, they're screwed together. It's a way to express your idea as fast as possible instead of being all precious about it and worrying about how it's made or even the joinery. And so it's just the way I work. It allows me to express ideas faster and more accurately than trying to sketch something like this in 3 dimensions. So speed is everything. speed. Just get the idea out. If you don't like it, make another one. If you don't like that, make another one. It's all about getting to the end place of maybe a successful design, and you usually don't hit on the first one. And so you don't need to spend a lot of time on the first one.
We have quite a few questions, and I feel like if we do too much of an intro, we might overlap on some of this stuff. So are you guys cool with jumping into questions?
Sure.
Great. So the first one's box related, and most of these are, but the first one's from Matcha, who's on our Discord channel. We have a Discord channel for Fine Woodworking, and you're able to jump on there and see, like, get an insight into what episode. So the public doesn't know this episode's coming out, but often if you jump on the Discord, you can have the opportunity to ask questions and for these recordings. So Matcha from Discord asks, are there any alternative joint methods that work well for veneering boxes? How do you guys decide on a veneer pattern for a specific box? And what are your favorite substrates for boxes? Do you want to go first, Larissa, on this?
I don't do a lot of veneering of boxes, so I feel like this is 100% an Adrian question.
Yeah, heavy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are you passing the torch? Are you passing the baton?
Fair.
How we say it in Quebec. 3-part question. Are there other joints for veneered boxes? Well, there are. There's a whole host. There's a whole myriad of joints, and it also stems to your third question: what's a substrate? And so that's going to drive what the joint is, right? So if you're going to do a plywood or MDF veneered box, then you have different options than if you're going to veneer over solid wood and join it that way. And so, for me, my go-to joint is a rabbet and a butt joint, just really simple, and it's a plywood core, and so it's 50% glue surface on all faces, and so you can't do that joint in solid. It's all end grain, so it'll fall apart. And so you got to just understand what material you're working with. Mitered boxes could also be, or not mitered. Veneered boxes could be mitered. That's a really effective way to join veneers together. But if you're using commercial veneer, you have this very prone corner of 40th of an inch veneer that's very delicate, and so it's hard to cut a miter out to zero and keep a pattern intact. And so that's why I put that little string around all of my boxes, is so it's not just a susceptible veneered corner. That would be my go-to right there: miters or rabbeted butt joints.
Are you reinforcing your miters with anything I guess it depends on the material, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. So the butt joint is not reinforced. The miter, I would put some sort of internal keys in, something blind that you don't see through the veneer.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a domino on 45, a little, number 6 going 45 right into the face.
How much work are you doing with like shops on veneer versus commercial veneer?
I don't really do any shops. I haven't done really shops on veneer in 20 years. It's I only do it for occasional little small boxes, but everything I do is commercial veneer. Nice.
And Larissa, I know you, I guess depending on boxes, you're doing miters right now, obviously, with the spiral boxes, yeah. and that's usually, is it reinforced with a spline, if I remember right?
No, I usually rip the miters on the long grain so I can just glue the miters together so they're strong, as opposed to cutting them across the length of it, which makes me need a jig at the table saw because they end up being like pretty narrow little pieces, but it makes it so I don't have to put a little reinforcement in such a tiny object.
That's right, because they're taller like boxes anyway, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I've seen you use like rabbets and stuff depending on the application.
I do love a pinned rabbet. I do.
Yeah. I like the little pinned rabbets. Awesome. You were saying, Larissa, you don't do a ton of like veneer work, but do you have when you do you have like a favorite substrate you use for smaller stuff?
I've done veneer work in like door panel.
Oh, okay.
For the most part, or like box lids, in which case I've used like MDF or plywood because they're captured and you'll never see the edges of them anyway, and they're not like structurally important.
Right.
But I've dabbled in lumber core for larger things, but not a huge amount. I'm no Phil Morley.
We had actually a question I omitted about for Adrian about Phil, but I may pull it up if we have time. I didn't know how appropriate it was, but since it's the first time we met,
we're just getting to know each other.
I know. I didn't want to ruin that right off the bat.
A little cute bromance here.
It's awesome. Yeah. So I keep seeing, I can't not talk about this. I keep seeing, and I didn't know like the origin of this, but the laser cut portraits of the both of you floating around in either of your stories. Is this just something?
It's just, I don't know where that happened, but we're running with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It started with Phil making one of Phil. I don't know where it came from. I think it was, how you doing? It was sort of a joke for his one of the gallery openings here. I think they laser printed that for his name tag, and so now it's become a joke for many other things. And so he subsequently printed one with my face on it and took it to England.
Yeah, you're like floating around England
with me. Yeah. I got something coming out of the woodwork very soon. So keep your eyes open for Philip Morley laser printed paraphernalia.
Yeah, tune into Instagram. I love that. So we'll jump into the next question, since I feel like we covered that veneering pretty well, though I'd love to touch back on that. This one's from Chuck, and he asks, how often do techniques you want to learn determine the creation of the box you're making versus having a purpose for the end project? And I'll go to Larissa again on this one, because I feel like you have a lot of good things to share on this.
I have an answer for it, yeah. So most of my box designs, including the spiral sprout boxes you were talking about, are born from me wanting to learn a technique and not wanting to put it in large format until I have an understanding of like what potential failures there are and like what jigs I need, whatever. So I wanted to learn hot pipe bending to make like poles and more refined parts of furniture, but I wanted to play with it first and understand the boundaries. So I did it for boxes originally. So a lot of my boxes are born from me just wanting to try something new. And then a box is born as like an avenue to learn that. And sometimes they stick and I make more than one. And sometimes it's just a one-off to try out a thing. And then if it's a commission and it has a specific function, then that will drive the project itself. But if it's just me doing it for fun, it's usually technique driven.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Adrian, you were saying you kind of you're designing as you go. So is that like, are you driven by technique at all, or is?
Not so much. In the early days, I was, when I was, learning all the different things. It was very exciting to have that drive your motivation to make something. But now it's all about what the thing's going to look like, and that's the most important thing to me. And after that comes, okay, now how are we going to make the thing? And so that is just usually the most practical means possible without getting too complicated for having to do a technique. So if I can avoid stuff like dovetails, I will, and put my energy into the graphics and the artistic sort of outcome of the piece.
Yeah. Do you, I guess in the same vein, do you use boxes maybe as a way to experiment with design and like patterns? And I love your pattern boxes.
For sure. Like I'm with Larissa on that. The scale of them is just perfect to experiment with because you're not invested in like some 6-week build or whatever it might be on a larger piece. And you can explore a lot of different options relatively quickly without a lot of time put into them. And you can also get a lot more outrageous with pattern and color and contrast than you would on a furniture. If I was going to buy a sideboard that's all crazy cracked ice, with wild veneers, but they will when it's a small object like a box. And so I think it's just a great scale object to really go wild on.
That's awesome. Since we've touched on the spiral boxes a couple times, there are definitely a bunch of people that were mind blown at your hot pipe bending the other day, Larissa, because nobody has achieved that tide of like. I was amazed too. It was the other day on your Instagram stories, right? Not posts.
It was, yeah.
But you're just getting these like tight like coils, and I was like, people were curious about your process for that.
That is just, I use ash because it bends really nice. And I rip them with like the same ripping jig that Matt Kenny uses to rip his Kumiko strips. And then I put it through a sander until it's like a 16th of an inch. So the thinner it is, the easier it bends, obviously. And then I soak it in water for like an hour or two and just bend it around. I'm not sure why my success works. I don't know what the secret is. I think it is very achievable. I pull it when I teach. I'm teaching 2 classes on that box in the next month or two. And usually when I'm teaching it, the key to bending it is pulling it like taffy, not like putting pressure down, but kind of like pulling out as you're bending around the pipe. So that way you're stretching out those fibers as opposed to like forcing them to do something they don't want to do. So maybe that's it. I'm not really sure.
Oh, nice. I wasn't sure how long you soak them. So it's just an hour that you need?
Yeah. I mean, the longer they soak, the better they'll probably bend, but you can also loosen the lignin too much so that it can be too hot or too water saturated. So I guess it's trial and error, which is why I started trying it with box lids where the stakes were pretty low.
Yeah.
But it's just kiln dried ash and then I soak it for an hour or two.
Awesome. We had another question about the spiral boxes too, since we're talking about them. For the coopering, do you use a big hose clamp or actual clamping, or just tape when doing the glue up? And
blue tape all day.
Blue tape, yeah, I thought so. For something that small, you don't need to really do any sort of crazy clamping, right?
Yeah, I have like a band clamp that if something goes awry in the glue up, it's like nearby, but usually just blue tape. Yeah.
Yeah. And he also asked, are you using jigs to maintain the exact shape of the box, or just relying on those miters again to...
I rely on the miters. I do measure them per square. So I measure like corner to corner to make sure that they're relatively in square. But the idea is that the lid, the lid is sawn off the box. So it's like a split lid situation. So the lid only fits on one way in the end anyway, where the grain lines up. So if it's not perfectly perfect, it will still align with the bottom.
Nice.
Yeah.
This was for both of you, actually. During box design and construction, is there a level of difficulty required to complete a task that would make either of you decide the start completion of the box wasn't worth as much effort as it would take? For example, curved bent laminating and all the jigs required. Basically, at what point does it go from box building to an exercise and just trying to really push your boundaries? And do you take the amount of time and labor into account whether it would be worth it to bring something from an idea to reality? That is a long question, but hopefully, yeah. Yeah, I guess, is there like a payoff? I don't know.
Well, it depends if you're talking about this is a thing you're going to sell, or this is something you're going to pursue to, advance to where you are in the skill and design sense. For me personally, I like to challenge myself. I like to make things really complicated. But I also like to balance that with some sensibility that it's not a stupid idea. Like, it shouldn't be so difficult to make that it's not really worth making. There should be some practicality to how it's constructed that makes some sort of logical sense in the woodworking world. And so I'm balancing that with obviously we've already talked about the design outcome as well. And so I personally try to keep things as simple looking as possible, but that doesn't always mean they're simply constructed.
I can see...
I don't know if that answers that question at all. I don't really... Anyway, Go on.
No, that makes total sense. After working with Phil for several years, I feel like you two are similar in that way. Like, he prefers a clean aesthetic, but he's like, I'm going to do lumber core. You're not necessarily going to see it, but it's a technique that he wanted to try at the time, back when he first started doing lumber core. And his is like, it the integrity of the panel is a lot better. So like, there's a purpose in it, and yeah, it's more work, but you're sort of like maintaining integrity at that point, right? Of the construction.
Yeah. Well, that comes down to just a fundamental in making, at least from my perspective, is that you try to do the best possible job you can for the level of skill you're at. And so you're constantly trying to improve on that. And so in the early days, naive woodworking was fun. You just glued stuff together, didn't care about it. But the more you learn about it, the more rules there are. And you're just like, oh man, I got to do this now. I got to do this now. I got to do this now. And the lumber core comes from just a sort of just crappy plywood. The plywood's all warped now. We can't find anything flat. And so now we have to make our own plywood again. It's kind of ridiculous.
How do you feel about this, Larissa? Or what are your thoughts on this?
I don't know. I don't know that I've ever walked away from a box and been like, that was like, I'm going to earn enough money to pay for the time and mental energy I put into it. It's more like a means of exploring other things for my own use of time or my brain or exercising something else. I spent like 2 weeks making a high C box. For what? But I learned a lot and I tried new ideas, and for that it was worth it. So I guess worth it is a relative question. But I've never gotten like halfway through a box and been like, no, this isn't worth it, I'm going to abandon it. I usually at least finish it into something.
That's good.
I abandon stuff if it just doesn't look good. Like, I'll be halfway. If I make 3 or 4 boxes at once and they're all different designs, I find 1 or 2 usually suffer and aren't worth pursuing anymore. And you spread yourself too thin trying to do too many things at once instead of focusing on 1 or 2 boxes. And so I'll abandon, not because it didn't turn out technically, it's because the graphics suck. It's just not something not right about it. And so I either give those away or put them in the wood stove.
I was going to say, those are the ones that I'll finish and they'll be like wedding gifts or birthday gifts or something, which is not to say they're not great. They're just like not ones that I'm going to like put for sale,
Yeah, there's something just didn't work out right.
Right. Also, I would never make 4 boxes at once. So I'm impressed with you and that even being an option.
Well, the ones I make are the setup is everything. And so you might as well set up a machine and run the cuts 8 times instead of once. And they're simple enough to make that not crazy, So on more complicated stuff, I wouldn't bother. I've known people to make 1 box, take them a whole year to make 1 box. And it's amazing. But how are you going to sell that?
Yeah.
So that's just personal skill, improvement and self-satisfaction. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, both of you are dedicating time at CFC to like perfect your craft or get better at your craft. And that, I mean, I think that speaks a lot to like what your views on it are. But I was wondering, Adrian, like, so you do production runs of things, at least small production runs of things. And do you feel like that gives you kind of the room to do a little bit more experimentation? Like knowing that you might abandon a few things along the way, but the others will come out differently? Or is it just, I don't know if that applies to...
I don't really do too much production stuff. If it is, it would be a set of 10 chairs. My little measuring sticks that I make once a year. It's the most production thing I've ever done, where I'll make like 80 of them and I'll start with 150 and then, 60% of them warp and have to go, like, aren't usable. Kind of spaced out on the question though.
I will say those sticks are really great. Those scoring sticks are so good.
I've seen those in person. Those are really great. I loved this always like stuck out to me. This was a while back, but the knurling you did on the knurling you did with the file.
Yeah, with the file.
I love that technique.
Old metal my old shop teacher hack right there. That's how they used to make. That's how they used to cut bolts. I don't know if they still cut bolts like that. So that's how they used to cut threads before they sort of machined them. And so that's a little hack you can do in the shop with soft metal. I got so many comments that I was abusing the file. It's just ridiculous. It's like it's a $10 file. People.
Yeah. I thought that was super cool. I guess to reword what I was trying to ask was, does the opportunity to make multiples of one thing help you, help make it worth it for you to experiment, like start a project? You're just like making a run of like the squaring sticks before. Yeah. I'm sure you knew they would work out ultimately, but like you're saying, you start from 150 to 80, and it's like that's not so much of a loss because of the quantity you're making, which allows you to go through the whole process. Does that help motivate you to start a big project like that? Because I'm sure it's pretty time consuming just based on the quantity of them.
Yeah, it's probably a month for me to make all those, but that is more for me an exercise in just efficiency of production. I'm always trying to figure out how to make something with the least amount of effort, and that means just body movement or machine setups or how many cuts I have to make. And so that's a nice mental exercise in production that I enjoy. It's problem solving, efficiency, with an aesthetic outcome that hopefully is good. But like I said, I don't do a lot of production stuff. That would be my only thing I can compare that to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes sense. I guess, and Larissa, you're doing several boxes, but I don't know that I would consider that a production run either. But you've gotten I guess it justified you making, like you said, the designated jigs for the cutting the long miters and.
Yeah, that was mostly born from having to teach people how to do it and wanting them to do it safely. So when you're ripping tiny pieces, and you aren't as comfortable with a table saw as a professional might be, a nice sled with a holding clamp is always better. Sure. But it's been nice for me as a result because it makes things faster, for sure. But yeah, that's the closest I get to production, and they're all different sizes and all different. And I only do 5 or 6 at a time because sanding those spirals is kind of the worst thing ever. So
I can imagine it's a lot of work. We have one more question, and then we can jump into some other stuff. But is the market for high-end boxes? I truly don't know this. Is the market for high-end boxes bigger or smaller than that for fine furniture? I don't know if there's an answer to this, but you might know.
I don't have any quantifying numbers on that, but but they're easier to sell. Mm-hmm. They're more impulsy, so people will just buy them and not think about it. Piece of furniture, someone usually has to look at it 3 times before they pull the trigger, and they got to hem and haw where it's going to fit in their house. And so, if you're doing spec work, freestanding furniture is tough because of that reason. And so these smaller objects, which still take a lot of time, are much less of a cost, but also much more impulsive. And so, when I put those in shows, they just sell. I put a chair in a show for $5,000, and maybe it sells. So I don't know if there's. The other thing to that is, though, can you get what it takes to make these boxes financially out of it? Some of these boxes I make have 70 hours in them. And so, how much does your mechanic charge for a 70-hour oil jar? That becomes a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 box. And so we're often working for much less than we would like to, because the price point is just going to stop people from buying it. So, pricing this stuff is the hardest part of it all. Sure. And then finding the client. So that's the trick, is to find the clients. And I find that the hardest thing. You can make this stuff all day long, but finding a place to sell it is the hard part.
So for the chairs you're making now, that these theoretically just end up being in a gallery like you're talking about, once you've picked a few that you like?
The ones I'm working on now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have no idea. They're just probably going to sit in the garden or something for now, and then next year, hopefully, I can do something like this again and actually make one of them. But there's no destination for them. Maybe a show here at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship. There's always a faculty show here, which is it's very successful. But they have no home right now.
Are you sitting in one of your chairs, Adrian?
I am.
How did you know that?
Because I saw the plywood and I was like, there's no chair where he's sitting. There's just stairs and a sidewalk.
Oh, right. You know the environment.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I guess that's the way to test a chair is, can I sit through an entire podcast comfortably?
Oh, it's wood. It's just a wood chair. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Got a sort of series of 3 of these. They're like monolithic extrusions. And so, for me, I'm envisioning these as like public seating or some giant house with a huge fireplace, like pairs of them. And so I'm having fun with just a scale of chair that's much larger than a normal residential chair.
Nice. Larissa, I mean, you kind of had the same expression. Maybe it's really hard to gauge this kind of thing, but do you feel like you have more clients requesting smaller work, or it's just kind of a mix?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It changes depending on where you're selling it, the clientele. But yeah, generally speaking, anything that somebody can carry away is going to sell easier than something that has to like permanently live in a very prominent place. So the dining table is a much bigger choice than a nice box that can sit somewhere. But yeah, I like I said, and like Adrian said, I don't know that I've ever gotten the money that I spent, or like gotten the money back for the time that I spent making a box, which is a hit I'm willing to take because I like doing it and I feel satisfied and I usually learn something or try something new. So it's worth it. But I don't know. Woodworking's a weird career as far as making money and selling things.
Yeah, for sure. Does it help that it's like a teachable project though, when it translates to teaching for either of you? Like, it seems like box classes typically do pretty well. Like, being able to fill those classes appeals to people.
No, it does. It's a great vehicle for a class because it's approachable for people that have any kind of shop at all. Like, you don't need a lot of machines necessarily. The skills are very approachable for a beginner to take on and not feel overwhelmed. And it's a short amount of time, right? So you're not investing, weeks or multiple weekends or, making this thing that's you never see any progress on. So the box, you see progress on it instantly and it comes together quickly. And that's why people, I think, gravitate towards it. They have a little creative freedom, and then the ability to finish a thing is also very appealing. Instead of going home with a pile of sticks and no shop to work in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Larissa, you've kind of like geared some of your classes, if I remember right, to where it is, even if it is to the point where they're taking it home, you kind of teach like, okay, these are the alternatives that you could do from like an apartment situation or.
Yeah.
Which I really love.
My classes are tailored to like, let's get it done with tooling that you can either afford to buy when you leave or already have at home. So it might take longer. It might require a little bit more like jigging or planning ahead. But like, yeah, I have at least 2 classes that are tailored to at least giving them the avenue to do something similar with whatever they have access to. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. But it depends on the complexity of the piece.
Sure. I really love that though. Like, for people just getting into it or whatever, the ability to I don't have to like be pressured to finish this during a class period and like miss maybe some of the stuff I'm supposed to be learning just to complete it. And I feel like that really helps. So Larissa, you're saying you have a couple more classes this year. Adrian, do you have anything coming up? Classes?
I've got in 2 weeks, I have a chair making class at Mark Adams, 7-day class. We're going to build a veneered dining chair in 7 days, which is pretty intense. And then in the fall, I have 2 sessions up in Canada at Rosewood Studio, a veneering workshop and then a box making workshop.
Awesome.
And I'm off till the next year.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Off teaching, that's.
Yeah, right. The other 50% of what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you, Larissa, you have, could you remind us what 2 classes you have coming up?
Yeah, I am teaching spiral strap boxes at Peters Valley, and I'm doing a fundamentals class at the Wendell Castle workshop where we will turn rough boards into a hall table and learn all the hand tools and machines and stuff along the way. And then at the Philadelphia Furniture Workshop, I will be doing spiral sprout box. And that one's more of a like every Wednesday evening for 6 weeks. So people in the Philly area can carry on with their normal lives and drop in once a week and we can do sawdust.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking some time to chat today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And would love to have, obviously, Larissa, we've had you on several times, but we'd love to have you back, Adrian, at some point.
Anytime.
We'll touch back on the chair progress. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Got another 7 days.
Woodcraft Supply knows that woodworking is more than just a hobby. It's your passion. And with Woodcraft's new everyday value, now it's a little more affordable. Woodcraft has lowered the prices on hundreds of essentials that woodworkers use every day, like Bessie clamps, Wood River hand planes, Type-On wood glue, dust collection fittings, and more. Check them out online at woodcraft.com or go to one of their 70-plus stores nationwide. It's just another way that since 1928, Woodcraft has been helping you make wood work. Regardless of your skill level in woodworking or home repair, you want a glue that you can trust. Because a glue that doesn't work can ruin any project in a hurry. Fortunately, Type-On has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp times, to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance, look to Type-On for the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit typebond.com, TITEBOND.com. Mike.
Hey, Ben.
Let's answer a couple questions.
Let's do it.
Or let's have you answer a couple questions. So, first off, this question, I know we've answered before, but this question's by Robert, and it's a really great asking of this particular question. As I progress as a woodworker, I find myself considering building an actual chair. I don't mean an Adirondack or a Morris chair, but an actual dining or desk chair. I love the distinction there. I get it. I don't know if I agree, but Robert, I feel you. I would like the joinery to be as bomb-proof as possible, but I don't have the scale or resources to attempt the type of tapered mortise and tenon joints used by Brian Boggs. My theory is that if I make the mortise and tenon joints as snug as possible, then add 2 pegs across each joint, I will nearly eliminate the possibility of racking and weakening the joint in the axis of the tenon. I don't mean offset pegs, I believe, so drawboard, as I believe normal clamping should bring the joint together, and I don't want to weaken the tenon excessively. I used this technique on a dining table recently. I hid the pegs from view by drilling and driving them from the inside of the legs through the apron and tenons, but not all the way through the outside of the legs. I did this after the glue in the joint had cured, and it added only a few minutes to my total build time. My questions are, do you think I'm adding strength to the joint? Do you think I'm weakening the joint? Have you ever heard of anyone using this technique, specifically double pegs, to help the joint resist racking? Do you think non-offset pegs make any sense at all? Thank you in advance for your opinions, insights, and expertise. I've been a Fine Woodworking Unlimited member for years, and I really enjoy the podcast. Thank you for being a member, Robert. So, a lot there. First off, is a Morris chair a real chair?
Is it? Yes, I think an Adirondack chair is a real chair too.
Yeah.
But Okay, yes. So the other thing that kind of threw me a little bit for a loop was mentioning a Brian Boggs chair, which is often a kind of a post and rung chair turned
Yeah.
tenons into a round mortise, otherwise known as a hole. I'm thinking we're talking about more like a traditional dining chair ish thing where we have like tradition, like the seat rails are
Yeah.
wide and long and are tenon into the legs with a traditional tenon.
I would assume so too.
Okay.
I don't think it's round mortise.
Yeah.
And if you've ever taken a Boggs class, it's like if you call it a hole, that's like it is not a hole. It is mortise.
Yes.
And there is like a switch that happens in your brain when you stop drilling a hole and start drilling a mortise. It's different. It's like this is more precise. But okay. Sorry.
Yes, I think the difference between a hole and a mortise is a level of precision and intent. Yes, I agree. Okay, so we're talking about pinning a joint either before or after. You mentioned what phrase did he use? Like an offset. So I'm guessing he's referring to like a drawbore tenon, where you're intentionally misaligning the holes in the tenon and the mortise. So when you drive in the pin, it pulls everything tight, as opposed to gluing everything up, drilling, and pinning. Both are super common. I would actually say that the pinning after the joint is glued up is probably more common just because it requires less forethought. I love both of those joints, and I will do and for me, obviously, with my kind of work, the joinery is the kind of main decorative element. So if I got a pin, I'm going to show that thing off. So I'm not trying to hide it, but he's absolutely correct. You can come in from the inside, pin from the inside, make sure you don't go all the way through, and not a problem. Is that strengthening the joint? I definitely think it is from the standpoint of I always think in terms of what if all the glue in this joint or this project suddenly disappeared? Would this project fall apart?
Yeah.
So the idea that we're actually adding mechanical strength along with the glue strength by drilling and pinning after the fact, I'm going to say yes. We are definitely adding some mechanical strength to that. In addition to the glue strength. So I do think that's a good thing. Now, are we adding 2 pins? Is that somehow weakening the tenon? I think it depends on how wide the tenon is. If you have a probably 2-inch wide and under, I'd go a single pin. Because really what you're doing is you're triangulating between the pin, that point, and the shoulder of the joint.
Okay.
So picture like a big triangle. So really adding a second pin isn't necessarily helping to triangulate that joint all that much, especially if it's a drawbore pin where the pin is designed to pull the shoulder tight to the mating piece, in which case a single drawbore pin is fine. I don't know if you're actually gaining a whole lot more by having a pair. Someone else may be able to chime in on that, but I think even in like big timber frame joinery and stuff, is that drawbore? But usually they have like a 1-inch diameter peg or something holding everything together.
I don't know if it's drawbore. That would be interesting. Well, I'll have to scroll through Shelter Institute's page. They have a lot of. So I'm with you now. 1 pin is going to triangulate. It's just going to keep that part from pivoting out.
Yeah. On the other hand, so you have a wide tenon, say it's a 3.5 to 4-inch wide tenon. So you have a couple pins there spread out. You're certainly not weakening the tenon. Do you have 2 mechanical points helping to hold that together? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Also, if I'm pinning, say, a door frame and the bottom rail happens to be really wide, I'll often do a pair of pins at the bottom, strictly for aesthetics. I'm not worrying about this door coming apart. So I'd say it's up to you. Whatever you think looks good. I don't know that we're getting a ton more strength, but I think he's alluding to the fact that chairs are often under tremendous racking force, basically front to back. That's really what you have to worry about. Different ways to get around that in terms of strengthening. You can have a wider side rails. That's going to give us a greater shoulder to shoulder length at the top of the chair. If it starts to look a little bit heavy, you can put a little arch on it. That's cool. The other thing you can do is, if you're worried about it, is basically instead of having one really wide seat rail, you can divide that into two rails. Have, say, a slightly narrower rail at the seat, and then down below you have a stretcher down there. So even if that's only, say, an inch high or inch and a quarter, that's still a lot of shoulder to shoulder height on there. And then if you're pinning that one too, you're basically turning this kind of U shape into a more of a box shaped square, which I think is probably going to give you better racking resistance as well. Then the other thing you can do, and I do this, is that, say it's a chair with a seat frame. So it's a dining chair, and there's going to be like a padded kind of a cushion thing that sits down. You have corner blocks on the inside of the chair at all four joints, and that can be really thick and create a ton of glue surface and surface area. I will both glue and screw those in place. So that is really fortifying that joint and helping to protect against racking. So, and again, to his point about hiding a pin, that's a nice way to add a lot of hidden strength to that joint without seeing that. So, chairs, I mean, it's an issue that people have been thinking about for a really, really long time. So there are a lot of good solutions out there for building sturdy chairs. The other thing you can do, and this is typically you don't think of through mortise and tenon joinery in association with like Queen Anne, which is kind of high style, and I don't want to see the joints, but the Queen Anne side chairs will often have the side rail going into the rear leg tends to be a through tenon, just to maximize that surface area of that tenon and really prevent racking there. So
I would have to rewatch Dan Fea's. I think it would have been covered in the Making Full Size Plans from an existing piece video workshop, but he does mention that certain regions did the through mortise on Queen Anne chairs, whereas like Boston, as opposed to Philadelphia, did the through mortise, and then like this subset did a wedge through mortise. And the chair that he was copying was Phil Lowe's, and his Phil's was a mixture of styles, like a favorite, of each, and it was two wedges in that through mortise. And I was just thinking about like, how long those chairs have lasted. Go to a museum and just see what chairs are still going. And also, as a dude who used to have a side hustle repairing chairs, it's like it was a lot of doweled chairs, but not a whole lot of mortise and tenon chairs. So I think a well-fitting mortise and tenon, you're already setting up the odds in your favor. My only worry about pinning it is thinking about the person 50 years from now who might have to repair it. Are they going to be able to get both sides apart in order to get that back H off or something if need be? So like when someone's thinking about truly building a bomb-proof piece, I think there needs to be an element that is like, no, bombs happen. Unfortunately, this is a horrible metaphor, but stuff happens. And if something happens, is it repairable? As opposed to like Barry one time had a chair that I repaired, and I wound up having to take almost the whole chair apart in order to repair one leg. Right. And then by the time he got it back, now the bottom undercarriage was totally rock solid, and now the top started wiggling apart, and it just turned into, this is not happening anymore. Like no longer worth it. So Yeah. Like I know everyone's desire to make a truly bomb-proof chair. And I think I have pages in a sketchbook of like weird overthought joinery and all sorts of things. But at some point, build the chair and pin it. So I don't think I've ever seen you do a pin that wasn't drawborn though.
Oh, I do tons. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Usually what I love about the drawbore pin is it's a self-clamping joint.
Yeah.
So if you're doing with either like big cumbersome parts or curved parts, which can be really hard to clamp because as you try to clamp them and the curve compresses and it throws everything out of square. I love the elegance of a drawbore pin, but I'm probably more often than not drilling and pinning after the fact, depending on the project at hand. So the other thing in addition to pins, especially on a chair with a trapezoidal seat, which is the chair is wider at the front than it is at the back.
Okay.
So now we have stretchers coming in at an angle into the front and rear legs on the side stretcher. So then the question is, are you keeping the tenons straight and angling the mortises in the leg posts, or are you making straight mortises in the legs and angling the tenons? And I tend to do straight holes, angled tenons, because it's a lot easier for me to do it. I figure out a way to do that. Because really, once we get to a straight tenon or angled tenon, then we have to bring into the shoulders into play. So you can have an angled tenon with shoulders square to the tenon. So right angles, that's really pretty easy. And you think, well, wouldn't a straight tenon be easier to cut? Yeah, but you have a straight tenon with angled shoulders, and that can be a nightmare to get right. So I take the easier path. However, people argue that having holes cut, mortises cut, I said holes.
I know, you've done it twice now.
Mortises cut square to the legs. What that does is it puts tenons exactly parallel to the racking force, the front to back racking force. So that is more easier to sort of pop out. Where if you have straight tenons into angled mortises in the legs, those angled tenons are going at an angle to the racking force and will technically give you more strength and resistance against racking, if you can imagine this thing going cross grain. So a lot of solutions. And in the magazine, we've shown how to do all those things. So kind of pick your poison there. And then when it comes to repair, I think we are evolutionary wise in terms of repair. We're a few steps behind other media where repair is a integral part to that. And what I mean is that when we repair something, we're still at the point where we want it to be invisible. We want a perfect match. We don't want to show that this piece has been repaired. But my wife does a lot of sewing and stitching, and she teaches decorative mending, which is kind of part of the slow fashion movement. So slow fashion means you don't buy a shirt for $10, throw it out in 6 months. It's like you buy something of good quality, you buy Carhartts, and they last for a long time. And then if you get a hole, you repair it. But when you repair it, you don't hide the repair to make it perfect. The repair itself becomes part of a decorative element to the piece. So taking that analogy to furniture repair, it's like, okay, so maybe we need to start to think about repairing furniture as really visible repairs. And then that becomes an integral decorative element to the chair. So maybe, I mean, you don't want to go like
so
crazy.
Drywall screws through the.
Well, okay, so maybe that's an unintentional thing. That's a bad thing if you didn't mean for it to be seen.
Yeah.
So, but we can go to weird extremes like, oh, I used poplar instead of walnut for this leg. It's like, yeah, you did. Okay. Where's that balance there? How
I've actually done a repair where I did it. I wanted it to. Mike Michelli talked me through, and we discussed it, and it was it was an old chair. It wasn't a valuable chair. I think it was maybe like, 80 years old or something. And I wanted the repair to be known. So when you took the seat cushion off, I made it out of, it was like a mahogany chair. I made the repair stretcher out of ash and I left it unstained. I might have stained it, but it was a very obvious repair. It was, I dovetailed it in from the bottom and it was just boom, there's an extra stretcher, going across the front just to hold everything tight, because I would have had to have taken the entire chair apart, and it was a upholstered chair. But yeah, I did exactly that. It was, this is, when you look at it, this chair's been repaired. It was mindfully done. The joinery was executed well, and that's it, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're already there. That's cool. Yeah. So there's Toshio Odate I was talking with him, and he was talking about in architecture, I think there's a method of building. I'm going to completely butcher this. It's almost sort of like a lath and plaster construction where, you've got kind of wooden internal elements with like a plaster or a coating going through to create the outer surface. And as the buildings age and that, I guess, gets damaged or erodes, they repair that in such a way where it's visible, so that repaired element has become sort of a desirable thing to have, to where now even in newer construction, that tends to be faked. It's almost like acid wash jeans, or like patching something that didn't need to be patched. So there's that, there's the aesthetic, there's the, it's okay for something to be repaired, all of a sudden for that to be this kind of decorative element to where, well, go ahead and add that in there. So, and the same thing with repairing ceramics in Japan, where pieces are glued back together and they take that gold lacquer with a brush and they actually draw over all of the sort of glue lines in the piece. Then that gold sort of matrix becomes a decorative element to that piece. So I like that. I think overall the idea is that we're honoring the age and the use of something. We're making it last longer, but we're not hiding the fact that you're not trying to dress it up to make it look like a brand new chair. We're acknowledging, hey, this thing's been around 20, 30, 50 years, and we're just going to keep it going. And we're not going to hide the fact that it's needed a little rehab. So I'm not sure how that really manifests itself in furniture. I'm sure we've been doing it. You've already done it, but something to think about.
Okay, so one little element of Robert's question that I'd like to make sure we touch on: if you're adding a peg in a chair, 1/4 inch isn't going to be worse. A 1/4 inch peg isn't going to be worse than a 3/8 inch peg. Is it? Like, the 3/8 isn't going to buy you that much more, because you're really after that mechanical connection, that perpendicular mechanical connection. Whereas the larger of a dowel you use, or peg, I guess maybe there's a distinction there. Is it a dowel or is it a peg? The larger of a peg you use, the more meat you are taking away from the mortise and tenon, right?
Yes. So I think kind of what you're getting at is you're really sort of focused on the shear strength of the pin. Mm-hmm. So in that, a 3/8 inch pin is going to have greater shear strength than 1/4 inch, but 1/4 inch is a lot. Now, an 1/8 inch pin, okay, now maybe the shear strength might not be. So so is a bigger pin better? And if you're removing material from the tenon, are you weakening the tenon basically because you're creating short grain on the inside and outside of that hole? The larger the hole, the wider the section of short grain there is on that tail end of the tenon, and it could potentially split out right there. And then it becomes aesthetic. If I have a big old honkin' 1/2 inch thick by 3 inch tenon, like going through a hay rake table, I think probably a 3/8 pin is probably going to look cool, and a 1/4 inch might look undersized. Whereas if I have this this nice kind of elegant little shaker side table and I'm pinning at the aprons to the leg, I don't want a 3/8 inch. I probably don't even want a 1/4 inch pin. I think maybe 3/16 is might be nicer for there. But 1/8 inch always looks too small. It looks too intentional. Like,
and this brings up a Pekovich trick that I've seen. That's like, what is you to visualize that pin? You will cut the end of a pin off.
Yeah.
And just like double stick tape it on the piece, so you could look at it and see and be like, is that size right, or does it need to be bigger, or so if it, I think Robert's going to hide his pins, but if it is seen, and yes, Mike does make the distinction between a 3/16 inch pin versus a 1/4 inch, obviously, but yeah, you will even mock that up, right?
Sure. Yeah. And here's the other thing is we tend to think of, okay, I have, let's say it's a leg or a door frame and I have a pin. I kind of want to center that visually along the width. Actually, you tend to want to always cheat the pin a little bit toward the shoulder.
Okay.
So it's intentionally offset and make sure it's offset enough so it looks like you did that on purpose. But I think I helped a student make a batch of kind of arts and crafts side chairs, and the wood was still a little bit on the green side. So when we pinned the tenons after glue up sort of in the center of those back leg posts, as those leg posts shrunk a little bit, it actually created a little hairline gap. And it's like, how is that there? This joint is still rock solid. How did that joint come loose? And it was just because that wood shrunk just enough. So you always want to offset the pin toward the shoulder to minimize any gaps created by eventual wood movement.
That's a pro tip.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I thought it was going to be because if it shrinks and it's close to center but not center, it looks like almost center looks worse than definitely not center.
Yeah. Then also moving the pinhole toward the shoulder gives you more meat to the outside of the tenon from the hole. So I think that's sort of strengthening that potential short grain area as well.
There's a lot of considerations.
There's a lot to talk about.
Everything's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, woodworking's hard, right? Okay, let's answer this next one a little quick. We went a little long for Robert, but here we go. This one's from Anton. Greetings from South Africa. I have a table saw in the attached photos. I'll try and just describe it for the audio-only audience. I'm struggling to get tear-out-free cuts. So normal-looking table saw, it is one of these fancy ones, though, where it looks like a normal American-style cabinet saw, but the left-hand side is a sliding table, it looks like.
Right.
And if I put a wooden spacer in front of the aluminum, so this is on the sliding table, or those of us in North America can just imagine a miter gauge. I cannot use the clamp to hold the piece, which is very useful for the stopper. Besides a sled, which is difficult because I only have one miter slot. What other options do I have? So there's a whole bunch of options.
Yeah. What came to mind for you first?
So my immediate reaction was that Tim Rousseau has a Powermatic with a sliding attachment, and he uses the clamp or the stop lock on the extrusion, but he just has a little spacer that he puts in front of that stop lock to hold the piece away from it, because he has like a 1/4 inch piece of MDF or something as a zero clearance stop behind the blade. Right. So he has a 1/4 inch piece of MDF for a zero clearance insert behind the miter gauge, if you will. And then he just has one or two spacer blocks to keep that in line all the way up to the stop lock.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, yeah, so there's two issues. See, there's a plunger, which pushes the piece straight down, which I've seen some miter gauges have those, and they make no sense because you're pushing down to the table surface, which you're sliding, moving across. So that never made sense. However, with the sliding table, it does make sense to want to lock that piece down. So that disc looks like there's a center metal cup, but the disc itself looks like plastic or something.
Okay, yeah.
So, and I also couldn't tell if there's any gap between that disc and this extruded fence. If there's a little gap, you could even just file a flat onto that. Like you said, if you can just slip a piece of 1/4-inch MDF behind it, that's fine. And then he has that sort of L-style stop that slides in the
flip
slot.
down. Yep.
Yeah. So now if that comes down dead flush to the fence, there's no clearance. So maybe you take that L off. I can't tell if this is made out of like plastic or aluminum, but you could just get a piece of plywood and make another L and have it stick out a little bit from the fence. So
yeah.
So basically in this case, yeah, we're trying to add a piece of 1/4-inch MDF or something to the fence to act as a zero clearance, and we're modifying the hold down and the flip stop to accommodate that. And I think the other option is just make a new sliding fence. Just remove that extruded piece of aluminum, get a solid piece of stock, and just run a T-track along the back and a T-track along the top edge. So you can mount it to the bolts onto the sort of the head of the miter gauge-ish thing, and then run your stop along that. And then you've just, because the cool thing is this piece can now slide side to side. So if you need to freshen up the zero clearance, you just loosen it up from the head and slide it over to get yourself a fresh cut. That's an afternoon.
Yeah.
But, if you want the zero clearance, that's going to be good. The blade was...
you got there too. Okay. It could use a cleaning.
It could be.
Anton?
At the least, it could use some cleaning. The other thing is that you have a wooden throat plate, which looks a little bit tired as well. So if you can get yourself a new throat plate, either sharpen up that blade or at least clean it, make sure that's cutting really well. That's going to eliminate all the tear out on the bottom of the cut.
Yeah.
It will help minimize the tear out on the back end, which is what you're most concerned about. But I think it's like, I think there are two things we want to address: the tear out on the bottom, which has to do with the throat plate and the quality of the cut you're getting from the blade, and on the back, which has to do with creating some sort of stop at the back, along with freshening up that blade. So few things to kind of dial that in a little bit.
Okay. Outside the box, maybe non-woodworkery question answer element. It's a carbide tipped blade that would cut a kerf into that aluminum fence if he nudged it over. Is that enough of a... No, that's dumb. I might even edit that out. I'm not going to edit that out. I will own my dumbness. But awesome. But I'm just for the sake of keeping it in place and whatever, but no, because it's not a flat surface. So it's like a T-slot kind of thing. So there would be an area where it would have no backing, and now you've just got an ugly slot cut into your aluminum.
Yeah, I don't have, I mean, I do have a couple miter gauges with that extruded fence that slides. I don't think I ever want my workpiece bearing against an aluminum fence. I think I always want some piece of padding or sacrificial fence.
Replaceable.
Yeah.
I'll try and upload some pictures of Tim Rousseau's setup, because that would be really quick and works for him.
Cool.
But yeah, okay. Well, Mike, thanks.
Hey, my pleasure.
Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button.
If you'd like your questions answered on the podcast, email us at shoptalk@finewoodworking.com, or you can jump on the Discord channel and get an inside scoop on what the next episode's going to be and ask some curated questions for when we have guests on the show.
Thank you to all of you who are Fine Woodworking Unlimited members. You're the ones that make this thing happen. You're funding our woodworking fun, and we sincerely appreciate it. Amanda and I both. Thank you for giving us jobs. And if you feel called to, a 5-star review on iTunes will help the algorithm show other woodworkers that this show exists. We will talk to you in 2 weeks. Have a great one.